Think Like Elon Musk, The Mindset Behind Impossible Goals. Chapter 1. The Question That Changed Everything. Most people think by copying what already exists. Elon Musk asks a different question. What if the impossible is only a problem waiting to be solved? That single idea may explain why one person looked at rockets and saw opportunity, looked at electric cars and saw the future, and looked at Mars and saw a destination rather than a dream. Elon Musk has often spoken about thinking from first principles, breaking a problem down to its most basic truths and building upward from there instead of following convention. Imagine hearing that private rockets are too expensive, electric cars will never replace gasoline vehicles, or humanity can never become a multi-planet species. Most people would accept those statements as facts. Elon Musk treated them as assumptions, and assumptions, in his view, are meant to be questioned. This audiobook is not about copying Elon Musk's life. It is about understanding the mental patterns behind extraordinary goals, because impossible goals are rarely achieved by people who think in ordinary ways. There is an old habit that shapes most human decisions. We look at what others are doing, then make small changes. Elon Musk calls this reasoning by analogy. It's comfortable, it feels safe, yet it often keeps people trapped inside old limits. Instead, Musk prefers a method borrowed from physics, first principles thinking. He breaks a problem into fundamental truths and rebuilds the solution from the ground up. Years ago, when Musk wanted to build rockets, experts told him that rockets were incredibly expensive. Most people would have stopped there, but Musk asked a different question. What are rockets actually made of? Aluminum, titanium, copper, carbon fiber? The raw materials cost far less than the final product. That simple observation became the foundation of SpaceX. This way of thinking applies far beyond technology. If you want to improve your career, ask what skills truly create value. If you want better relationships, ask what makes people trust and respect each other. If you want financial freedom, ask what principles create wealth over time. The goal is not to accept inherited answers. The goal is to ask better questions. That is where impossible goals begin. Not with confidence, not with money, not even with talent. They begin with a mind willing to challenge what everyone else takes for granted. And perhaps that is the first lesson from Elon Musk's mindset. The future does not belong to people who merely follow the world. It belongs to those who are willing to rethink it. In the next chapter, we will explore the mental model that sits at the center of Elon Musk's thinking, first principles, how breaking problems down to their foundations can change the way you work, learn, and pursue goals that once seemed impossible. Chapter 2. Break the problem before it breaks you. Elon Musk does something most people rarely do when they face a difficult problem. He refuses to accept the problem in the form it is presented. When someone says, "This will cost too much," Musk's instinct has often been to ask, why? When someone says, "That is impossible," the next question becomes, according to which fundamental law? And when an entire industry agrees that something has to be expensive, complicated, or slow, he tries to separate what is genuinely impossible from what has simply become customary. This is the practical side of first principles thinking. It sounds intellectual. In practice, it is brutally simple. Take a problem apart. Find what is actually true, then build the solution again from the bottom. Musk has described this approach as reasoning from the fundamental truths of physics rather than simply copying what others have done. He has also acknowledged that reasoning by analogy is easier and that first principles thinking demands much more mental effort. Consider the problem that eventually became SpaceX. In the early 2000s, Musk wanted to pursue a Mars mission. He explored the possibility of buying rockets and encountered prices in the tens of millions of dollars. A conventional response would have been straightforward. Rockets cost that much, so the mission is too expensive. But Musk did not stop at the price tag. He asked what a rocket was actually made of. Aluminum alloys, titanium, copper, carbon fiber, other components. Then came the more interesting question: what would those materials cost as raw materials? The gap between the cost of the materials and the price of a finished rocket suggested that the existing manufacturing system contained enormous inefficiencies. That realization helped convince Musk that building rockets himself might be possible. That distinction matters. A constraint is something reality imposes on you. An assumption is something people tell you reality imposes on you. The two can look almost identical until you question them. You cannot negotiate with gravity, you cannot ignore the laws of physics, but you can question why a particular component must be manufactured in a certain way, why a process requires 10 steps instead of 5, or why a product costs far more than its underlying materials. This mindset later appeared in Tesla as well. Musk has explained how he looked at battery costs by examining the materials inside the batteries rather than simply accepting the historical price of battery packs. And that is where the lesson becomes useful outside rockets and electric vehicles. Suppose you want to become better at public speaking. Most people immediately search for techniques. Memorize scripts, speak louder, use certain gestures. First principles thinking asks something more basic. What actually makes someone persuasive? Perhaps it is clarity. Perhaps it is confidence created through preparation. Perhaps it is the ability to understand what the listener needs. Now you have something different from a collection of speaking tips. You have a problem you can investigate from its foundations. The same method can be applied to business, learning, fitness, money, relationships, or almost any difficult goal. Start with the outcome. Strip away tradition. Question every assumption. Find the facts that cannot be negotiated, then rebuild. This does not guarantee success. Musk's own experience shows that first principles reasoning can establish that a goal may be possible without telling you exactly how difficult the journey will become. That distinction is important. Thinking differently does not make reality easier. It simply helps you see reality more clearly. And sometimes that is enough to discover that the wall standing in front of you was never a wall at all. It was a habit of thinking. In the next chapter, we will examine another defining feature of Musk's approach: why he sets goals that appear unreasonable in the first place, and how an enormous goal can change the way you approach ordinary problems. Chapter 3. Choose a goal that feels too big. Elon Musk is known for pursuing goals that can sound almost unreasonable when you first hear them. Build electric cars people actually want. Develop reusable rockets. Make human life multiplanetary. At first glance, these goals seem disconnected from ordinary life, but there is something important hidden inside them. Musk does not appear to begin with the question, "What can I comfortably achieve?" He often begins with a much larger question: what would actually matter if it were achieved? That distinction changes everything. A small goal usually gives you a small problem to solve. A massive goal forces you to rethink the problem itself. When Musk became involved with SpaceX, the ambition was not simply to build another aerospace company. His stated long-term motivation was to help make humanity a multiplanetary civilization and increase the probability that civilization could survive. That is an unusually large objective, and it changes the scale at which every engineering decision is viewed. The same pattern appeared with Tesla. The broader mission was not merely to manufacture an electric sports car. Tesla's stated mission developed around accelerating the transition to sustainable energy. That required thinking beyond a single vehicle and considering batteries, manufacturing, charging infrastructure, and mass market adoption. There is a psychological advantage to thinking this way. When your goal is small, you tend to protect the existing system. You ask, how can I make this slightly better? When the goal is enormous, incremental improvement may no longer be enough. You start asking, what needs to change completely? Imagine someone wants to increase their income by 10%. They may simply work more hours. Now, imagine the same person wants to build a company that can eventually serve millions of customers. Working longer is no longer the complete answer. They have to think about systems, technology, distribution, hiring, capital, and scalability. The size of the goal changes the questions, and the questions determine the direction of your thinking. But there is a danger here. Big goals can become empty fantasies if they are not connected to reality. Simply saying, I want to change the world, does not make someone capable of changing it. Ambition without execution is just imagination. Musk's approach is more interesting because enormous objectives are repeatedly translated into technical problems. A mission to make rockets cheaper becomes a manufacturing problem. A desire to make electric vehicles practical becomes a battery, software, production, and engineering problem. A vision of human life beyond Earth becomes a problem involving propulsion, spacecraft, life support, launch costs, and reliability. The dream stays enormous. The next action becomes specific. That may be one of the most useful lessons here. Do not shrink the destination simply because the first step looks difficult. Instead, keep the destination large and make the next problem small enough to attack. You do not need to know every step from the beginning. You need to identify the next obstacle, then solve it. Another, then solve that one. This is how an apparently impossible objective can gradually become a sequence of ordinary decisions. And there is something else worth remembering. A huge goal does not guarantee a huge result. Some ambitions fail. Some take far longer than expected. Others change shape completely along the way. The value of an ambitious goal may lie partly in what it forces you to become. It demands deeper learning. It exposes weak assumptions. It makes mediocre solutions harder to tolerate. Most importantly, it gives your daily work a larger context. So ask yourself a difficult question. If you knew you could not fail, what problem would be worth spending years trying to solve? Don't answer too quickly, because the answer may reveal whether you are choosing your goals based on what you genuinely value, or simply choosing goals that feel safe enough to pursue. In the next chapter, we will look at what happens after the big goal is chosen, why Musk places such unusual emphasis on speed, iteration, and learning from failure.
Chapter 4. Move Fast, Learn Faster. Elon Musk has spent much of his career operating under a simple but demanding assumption. If you are trying to build something difficult, waiting for perfect conditions can become its own form of failure. The idea sounds obvious until you see what it requires. You have to build something before you completely understand it. You have to test ideas before you know whether they will work. And sometimes you have to watch an expensive project fail in public, then decide what the failure taught you. That last part is where Musk's approach becomes especially interesting. Consider SpaceX in its early years. The company was attempting something that had defeated many experienced teams, developing and launching orbital rockets with a relatively small private organization. The first 3 Falcon 1 launches failed to reach orbit. By the third failure, SpaceX was under enormous financial and operational pressure. The fourth launch succeeded in September 2008, and that success helped keep the company alive. From the outside, the first 3 launches could simply be called failures. From an engineering perspective, they were data. A rocket that fails does not merely tell you that the rocket failed. If the team investigates carefully, it can reveal where assumptions were wrong, which components behaved differently than expected, and what needs to change before the next attempt. This is the logic of iteration. Build, test, observe, change, test again. It is very different from waiting until everything feels safe. And this principle is not limited to rockets. Suppose you are learning public speaking. You could spend 6 months reading about communication before ever speaking in front of an audience. Or you could prepare a short presentation, deliver it, notice where people lose interest, listen to your own recording, adjust your delivery, and try again. The second approach may feel uncomfortable, but it gives you something the first approach cannot provide: feedback from reality. That distinction matters. A plan exists inside your head. Reality does not care about your plan.
The sooner an idea meets reality, the sooner its weaknesses become visible. Musk's companies have repeatedly operated through this kind of iterative engineering process. SpaceX, in particular, has used flight tests to gather information and modify subsequent vehicles and systems. The process has included spectacular successes as well as highly visible failures. But there is a subtle lesson here that is easy to miss. Moving fast does not mean acting carelessly. Speed without learning is simply repeated chaos. The useful version of speed is the speed at which you can move through a learning cycle. If you make a mistake today, understand it tomorrow, change the system, and perform better next time, the mistake has become part of the process. If you make the same mistake 10 times because you never examine what went wrong, speed is not helping you. So the real question is not, how quickly can I finish? It is, how quickly can I learn what actually works? That is a much more powerful question. It changes how you look at rejection. It changes how you look at criticism. It even changes how you look at failure. Failure becomes less personal. Instead of saying, "I failed," you can ask, "What did reality just teach me?" That does not make failure painless. Losing money, time, reputation, or opportunity still hurts. But pain and information can exist at the same time. The people who eventually build difficult things are not necessarily those who avoid mistakes. They may simply become better at extracting useful information from them. So if you have an ambitious goal, do not wait for the perfect version of yourself to begin. Build the smallest version, test it, listen, adjust, then go again. Because the path to something extraordinary may not be one brilliant decision. It may be hundreds of imperfect decisions, each one teaching you enough to make the next one slightly better. And once you understand that, failure stops looking like the opposite of progress. Sometimes it becomes part of progress itself. In the next chapter, we will explore another uncomfortable part of the Musk mindset: risk. Why pursuing extraordinary goals often means accepting uncertainty, and why not every risk is worth taking.
Chapter 5. Learn to live with risk. Elon Musk has repeatedly placed himself in situations where failure could have been financially devastating, professionally humiliating, or both. But the deeper lesson is not simply to take more risks. It is to understand what kind of risk you are actually taking. There is a difference between courage and recklessness. One examines the consequences and moves forward anyway. The other ignores the consequences entirely. Musk's career contains examples of extraordinary risk-taking and the severe pressure that can accompany it. In the early years of SpaceX and Tesla, his financial position became deeply tied to the survival of those companies. By 2008, SpaceX had experienced 3 consecutive Falcon 9 launch failures, while Tesla was struggling through the financial crisis. Musk later described that period as one in which both companies were close to collapse. The interesting question is, why continue? Part of the answer lies in the way Musk frames risk. If a goal matters deeply enough, avoiding every possibility of failure can become its own kind of failure. You may preserve your comfort, but you also preserve the existing situation. That does not mean every ambitious person should gamble everything. Quite the opposite. A useful risk assessment begins with a simple distinction. What happens if I succeed? Then, what happens if I fail? And finally, can I survive the failure? That third question is often neglected. Imagine you want to start a business. Quitting your job immediately and spending every dollar you have may create enormous pressure, but pressure itself does not guarantee better decisions. A more calculated approach might involve testing the business while maintaining enough financial stability to survive if the idea fails. The objective is not to eliminate risk. It is to understand the risk well enough to decide whether it deserves your commitment. This is where Musk's mindset connects with first principles thinking. Instead of treating risk as one giant emotional word, break it apart. What exactly could go wrong? How likely is each outcome? How severe would the consequences be? Which variables can you control? Which ones cannot? What would make the risk smaller? Suddenly, fear becomes a problem that can be analyzed. Not every fear disappears, but it becomes more precise. There is another side to this. Musk has often pursued goals where the probability of immediate success was uncertain, but the potential impact was enormous. SpaceX is a clear example. The company was not simply trying to launch another rocket. Its larger ambition involved making spaceflight dramatically more affordable and eventually supporting human expansion beyond Earth. When the possible reward is enormous, a person may rationally accept more uncertainty. But there is a trap here. People often see the successful outcome and forget the years of uncertainty that came before it. They look at a successful company and say, "He took the risk and won." That is survivorship bias. Thousands of people take enormous risks and do not become famous. Their stories rarely receive the same attention. So the lesson should never be, take the biggest risk possible. A better lesson is, take risks that are connected to something you genuinely value, understand the downside, and avoid confusing bravery with ignorance. You may never build a rocket company. You may never launch a revolutionary product. You may simply decide to change careers, start a business, publish your work, or pursue a goal that your current environment considers unrealistic. The psychological challenge is similar. At some point, certainty runs out. You have to act with incomplete information. That is not a weakness in the system, it is part of the system. The goal is to become comfortable enough with uncertainty that you can make thoughtful decisions without requiring a guarantee. Because impossible goals rarely come with guarantees. They come with probabilities. And the person who learns to think clearly under uncertainty has a much better chance of making the right move when certainty is unavailable. In the next chapter, we will look at something Chapter 6. Delete what does not matter. Elon Musk has a habit that sounds almost too simple. Before trying to make a process better, ask whether the process needs to exist at all. That question can be surprisingly powerful. Most people improve systems by adding things: another meeting, another approval, another report, another software tool, another person responsible for checking what someone else already checked. Over time, a simple process becomes complicated. Nobody remembers exactly why each step exists, but removing any of them feels dangerous. Musk described a different approach to manufacturing and engineering. In a 2023 conversation about his work at Tesla and SpaceX, he emphasized a sequence of actions that begins with questioning requirements, then deleting unnecessary parts or processes, simplifying and optimizing what remains, and only afterward considering automation. The order matters. Delete first, automate later. That sounds like a manufacturing principle, but it also reveals something about how to think. Consider your own life. Suppose you want to become more productive, so you download another productivity application. You create a complicated schedule. You organize your tasks into several categories. You watch videos about time management. Yet your most important work still does not get done. The problem may not be a lack of tools. It may be that you have too much unnecessary activity surrounding the work. First principles thinking asks a different question. What actually needs to happen? If the answer is write 10 pages, perhaps everything else should support that objective rather than compete with it. If the answer is learn a difficult skill, then perhaps the most valuable activity is simply spending focused time practicing it. This is where simplification becomes more than efficiency. It becomes clarity. When you remove unnecessary steps, you also remove places where attention can disappear. That matters because human attention is limited. A complicated system creates friction. You have to remember more, coordinate more, wait for more people, and make more decisions. A simpler system gives you fewer opportunities to become distracted. At Tesla, manufacturing became an especially important area of focus because producing vehicles at scale required far more than designing a good car. The production system itself had to work reliably and economically. Musk's emphasis on manufacturing reflects a broader belief that engineering does not end with the invention of a product. The process of making it matters just as much. But there is an important warning. Simplification can become dangerous when people delete things they do not understand. Not every rule is pointless. Not every approval is bureaucracy. Not every safety procedure should be removed simply because it slows you down. The real skill is distinguishing necessary complexity from inherited complexity. That requires asking uncomfortable questions. Why is this step here? Who actually needs it? What problem does it prevent? What would happen if we removed it? Is there evidence that the step creates value? These questions can be applied almost anywhere: at work, in business, in studying, even in personal routines. You might discover that half of what fills your day is not connected to your actual objective, and that discovery can be uncomfortable, because removing unnecessary work forces you to confront what matters. Sometimes we stay busy because being busy feels productive, but activity and progress are not the same thing. A person can spend 10 hours working and accomplish very little. Another person can spend 3 focused hours solving the right problem and move much further. The difference is not always effort. Sometimes it is selection. What deserves your attention? What can disappear? What should never have been there in the first place? That is the deeper lesson behind Musk's approach to process. Before you optimize your life, examine it. Before you automate a task, question it. Before you add another commitment, ask whether the existing ones are producing the result you actually want. And before you try to become faster, make sure you are moving in the right direction. Because sometimes the biggest improvement does not come from doing something better. It comes from realizing you never needed to do it at all. In the next chapter, we will examine another part of Musk's mindset, obsessive learning, and why understanding something deeply can give you an advantage even when you are entering a field where you have little traditional experience. Chapter 7. Become a relentless learner. Elon Musk entered industries where he did not begin as the obvious expert. His advantage was not that he knew everything. It was that he was willing to learn aggressively enough to challenge what he did not understand. That distinction matters. When someone enters a new field, the natural response is often to respect the experts and accept their conclusions. Experts have years of experience. They know the terminology. They understand the systems. So why question them? Musk's approach has often been different. According to biographer Walter Isaacson, Musk immersed himself in technical subjects, questioned engineers directly, and spent substantial time learning the details of the businesses and technologies he was trying to build. Isaacson's account of Musk's work at SpaceX and Tesla describes a person who repeatedly pushed into technical discussions rather than remaining at the level of high-level management. This does not mean becoming an expert overnight. It means becoming difficult to fool. If you understand the fundamentals of a subject, you can ask better questions. You can recognize weak assumptions. You can identify when a problem is genuinely difficult and when someone is simply telling you that it is. That is a powerful advantage. Think about learning any complicated subject. At first, everything appears equally important. There are hundreds of terms, dozens of techniques, endless opinions. But as your understanding grows, the structure begins to appear. You start seeing which ideas are foundational and which are merely details. This is why Elon's interest in physics is so relevant to his broader thinking. Physics forces you to deal with fundamental constraints. Gravity does not care about corporate hierarchy. Materials do not become cheaper because an executive wants them to. A rocket either generates enough thrust or it does not. Reality provides the feedback. That mindset can be applied to almost any discipline. If you want to understand business, learn how value is created and how money actually moves. If you want to understand communication, study attention, incentives, perception, and human behavior. If you want to understand technology, learn what the underlying system actually does rather than memorizing fashionable terminology. The goal is not to know everything. The goal is to understand enough that you can reason independently. There is another important element here: learning across fields. Musk's work has required knowledge from multiple disciplines: physics, engineering, manufacturing, software, finance, and management. The combination matters because difficult problems rarely stay inside one academic department. A manufacturing problem can become a software problem. A software problem can become a hardware problem. A hardware problem can eventually become a financial problem. Real-world systems do not respect the boundaries between subjects. That is why broad learning can become so useful. You begin to connect ideas that are normally kept separate, and those connections can produce better questions. But there is a trap in the idea of learning relentlessly. Consuming information is not the same as understanding it. You can watch hundreds of videos and still be unable to solve a real problem. You can read dozens of books and still make poor decisions. Knowledge becomes useful when you can apply it. So after learning something, test it. Explain it in simple language. Use it to solve a problem. Try to predict what should happen next. If your prediction fails, investigate why. That process turns passive information into working knowledge. And this may be one of the most practical lessons from Musk's approach. You do not need permission to become knowledgeable. You do not need a prestigious title before you can ask serious questions. You do not even need to know exactly where your learning will lead. Start with curiosity, then go deeper. When something seems complicated, resist the urge to look away. Ask what it is made of. Ask why it works. Ask what would happen if one assumption changed. Eventually, the unfamiliar becomes familiar, and once that happens, you can begin challenging it. That is where independent thinking starts. In the next chapter, we will explore what happens when independent thinking creates conflict, why Musk has often been willing to make unpopular decisions, challenge established opinions, and operate without needing everyone around him to agree. Chapter 8. Think Independently. Elon Musk has built much of his career around a dangerous question. What if everyone is wrong? It is dangerous because independent thinking can take you somewhere useful or somewhere completely misguided. The difference is whether your ideas are tested against reality. Musk's willingness to challenge conventional thinking became especially visible when he entered industries dominated by established companies. At SpaceX, he was attempting to reduce the cost of launching rockets. At Tesla, he was pushing electric vehicles into a market where gasoline-powered cars had long been the norm. Neither objective required simply accepting the assumptions already embedded in those industries. But independent thinking does not mean automatically disagreeing with everyone. That is just another form of dependence. If the crowd says yes, and you instinctively say no, the crowd is still controlling your thinking. True independence is different. You examine the evidence, you listen to experienced people, then you make your own judgment. That sounds reasonable, but it becomes difficult when the people around you strongly disagree. Imagine sitting in a meeting where everyone believes a project will take 12 months. You believe it can be completed in 4. The easy response is to stay quiet. After all, the people in the room may have more experience. But independent thinking requires another question. What evidence supports the 12-month estimate? Maybe there are genuine technical constraints. Maybe the estimate is based on an old process. Maybe nobody has questioned the assumptions for years. Or perhaps your 4-month estimate is unrealistic. The point is not to prove yourself right. The point is to find out what is actually true. This is where independent thinking connects directly to first principles. First principles give you a method for questioning assumptions. Independent thinking gives you the willingness to do it. Without the first, independence becomes arrogance. Without the second, first principles thinking remains an interesting idea that never changes your decisions. There is another psychological obstacle: social approval. Human beings are strongly influenced by the people around them. We notice what our colleagues believe. We pay attention to what successful people are doing. We hesitate to express ideas that might make us look foolish. This is understandable. Being accepted by a group has always mattered to humans, but extraordinary goals often require some willingness to tolerate disagreement. If your goal is genuinely different, your strategy may also need to be different. That does not mean seeking conflict. It means becoming comfortable with the possibility that other people may not understand your reasoning immediately. And there is a practical way to develop this ability. Before asking, "What do other people think?" ask yourself, "What do I think the evidence says?" Then compare your answer with theirs. Sometimes you will discover that they are right. Good, you learned something. Sometimes you will discover that your own idea survives scrutiny. Also good, now you have a reason to move forward. Either outcome is useful. The real danger is making decisions simply because an idea is popular. History is full of technologies, companies, business models, and social assumptions that once appeared permanent. They were not. But there is a darker side to independent thinking. A person who becomes too confident in their own reasoning can stop listening. That can be just as dangerous as blindly following the crowd. Musk's career illustrates this tension. His willingness to challenge conventional wisdom has produced remarkable outcomes, but his management style and decision-making have also generated substantial criticism and controversy. So the lesson is not trust yourself and ignore everyone. It is think for yourself, but test yourself. Question the crowd, question the expert, then question your own conclusion. That final step may be the hardest, because independent thinking is not about believing that you are smarter than everyone else. It is about caring more about what is true than about being proven right. When you can do that, disagreement becomes useful. Criticism becomes information, and uncertainty becomes something you can work with rather than something you need to escape. In the next chapter, we will turn toward a more personal question. What happens when an enormous ambition demands an enormous amount of persistence, and when continuing becomes harder than starting ever was? Chapter 9. Stay when it gets hard. Starting something difficult is often exciting. Staying with it after the excitement disappears is where the real test begins. Elon Musk's career contains several moments when continuing looked far less reasonable than quitting. SpaceX's early years were not a smooth march toward success. The company experienced 3 consecutive Falcon 1 launch failures before the 4th launch successfully reached orbit in September 2008. At the same time, Tesla was facing serious financial pressure during the global financial crisis. Musk later described that period as extraordinarily difficult, with both companies approaching the edge of failure. This is where persistence becomes different from motivation. Motivation is emotional. It rises. It falls. Some mornings you feel unstoppable. Other mornings the same goal feels exhausting. Persistence is less dramatic. It is the ability to continue making decisions after the emotional energy has disappeared. That does not mean refusing to quit under every circumstance. Sometimes quitting is rational. A business model may be fundamentally broken. A strategy may be producing no meaningful progress. A personal goal may no longer be worth the cost. Persistence without judgment can become stubbornness. The more useful question is the goal still worth pursuing, and is the current approach still working? If the answer to the first question is yes, but the second is no, change the method. That distinction can save years of wasted effort. SpaceX's early failures illustrate the idea. The failures did not automatically prove that the larger objective was impossible. They provided information about the vehicle, the engineering process, and the company's assumptions. The 4th Falcon 1 launch succeeded after the company had learned from those earlier attempts. There is something psychologically important here. A failed attempt can make you feel that the entire goal has failed, but those are not the same thing. You can fail at a strategy without failing at the mission. You can lose a job without losing your ability to build a career. You can have a failed business without proving that you cannot become an entrepreneur. You can give a terrible presentation without proving that you are incapable of becoming a good speaker. The mistake is turning an event into an identity. Instead of saying, "I am a failure," say, "That approach failed." The difference is small in language. It can be enormous psychologically. Once the failure becomes information rather than identity, you can study it. What went wrong? What did I misunderstand? What was outside my control? What should I change? What should I never repeat? This is how persistence becomes intelligent. There is also a deeper reason difficult goals require endurance. The further you move from conventional territory, the less guidance you receive. When everyone knows how to do something, there are established procedures. When almost nobody has done it successfully, the procedure has to be discovered. That means uncertainty becomes part of the work. You may spend months solving a problem that nobody around you can guarantee will be solved. You may make decisions with incomplete information. You may receive criticism from people who think the goal itself is unrealistic. And sometimes they will be right. That is why persistence needs humility. You have to remain committed enough to continue, while remaining flexible enough to change direction. This balance is difficult. Too little persistence, and you abandon valuable ideas too early. Too much stubbornness, and you keep defending an idea that reality has already rejected. The goal is neither. The goal is adaptive persistence. Hold the mission, question the method, keep learning, keep moving. And understand that progress rarely feels dramatic while you are living through it. Most progress looks ordinary. One more test, one more revision, one more conversation, one more attempt. Then eventually, the accumulated effect becomes visible. That is why impossible goals can be misleading. From a distance, success looks like one extraordinary achievement. Up close, it often looks like thousands of ordinary actions performed after the novelty has disappeared. So when your own goal becomes difficult, do not immediately ask, "Do I still feel motivated?" Ask something better. Is this goal still worth pursuing, and what does reality require me to change? That question keeps you moving without turning persistence into blind stubbornness. And there is one final issue we still need to examine. A mindset built around enormous goals, extreme effort, and relentless execution can produce extraordinary results. But it can also carry serious costs. In the final chapter, we will look at the darker side of the Musk mindset, and why thinking like an extraordinary achiever does not mean copying every part of an extraordinary person's life. Chapter 10. Build Your Own Impossible. Elon Musk's mindset is powerful, but the real lesson is not to become Elon Musk. It is to understand which parts of his way of thinking can help you build a life that is unmistakably your own. Throughout this audiobook, we have explored a pattern. Question assumptions. Think from first principles. Choose goals that matter. Move quickly enough to learn. Take calculated risks. Remove unnecessary complexity. Learn deeply. Think independently. And when the goal still matters, persist through difficulty. Taken together, these ideas form something more useful than a collection of motivational quotes. They form a way of approaching problems. But there is an important warning. Musk's life should not be treated as a perfect blueprint. His extreme work habits, intense management style, personal conflicts, and willingness to operate under extraordinary pressure have attracted significant criticism. Walter Isaacson's biography, for example, portrays a complicated figure whose ambition and technical drive coexist with impulsiveness and difficult interpersonal behavior. That matters because success can create a dangerous illusion. We see the outcome and assume every behavior that accompanied it must have been necessary. That is not how evidence works. A successful entrepreneur can teach you something about decision-making without teaching you how to live every part of your life. You can admire persistence without glorifying exhaustion. You can learn from risk-taking without gambling recklessly. You can value independence without becoming arrogant. You can pursue enormous goals without sacrificing every relationship around you. That distinction may be the most mature lesson of all. The purpose of studying extraordinary people is not imitation. It is extraction. Take the useful principle. Test it in your own circumstances. Discard what does not fit. Build something better. So what does that look like in practice? Start with one problem, not 10. 1. Ask what you actually want to change. Then strip away the assumptions surrounding it. What do you know? What are you merely believing? What evidence would change your mind? Next, make the goal large enough to matter, but concrete enough to act on. Do not say, "I want to be successful." Define what success would actually look like. Perhaps you want to build a business that gives you financial independence. Perhaps you want to become an exceptional communicator. Perhaps you want to create something that reaches millions of people. Whatever the goal is, bring it down to the next physical action. Then begin. Do not wait until you feel completely prepared. You probably never will. Build something small. Test it. Learn from what happens. Remove what does not work. Then repeat. And when someone tells you that your goal is impossible, do not immediately believe them, but do not immediately reject them either. Ask, what exactly makes it impossible? Maybe there is a genuine constraint. If there is, understand it. Maybe there is only an old assumption. If so, question it. That is the mindset we've been building toward. Not blind optimism, not endless ambition, not the belief that you can accomplish anything simply by wanting it badly enough. Something more grounded. A willingness to look at reality without automatically accepting its existing boundaries. Elon Musk's story is still unfolding, and history will ultimately judge many of his decisions differently than the present does. Some ideas will succeed, others will fail. Some achievements may prove more important than they currently appear, while some ambitions may turn out to be unrealistic. That uncertainty is precisely why the mindset is worth studying. You do not need to predict the future. You need to learn how to reason when the future is uncertain. So, as this audiobook comes to an end, remember the central question. What would you attempt if you stopped asking what is easy and started asking what is worth doing? Perhaps your impossible goal is not a rocket. Maybe it is a company, a book, a skill, a new career, a completely different life. The scale doesn't matter as much as the commitment behind it. Think from fundamentals. Question what everyone assumes. Learn faster than your fear. Take risks you can understand. Stay flexible when reality disagrees with you, and keep moving towards something that matters. Because the most important lesson from Elon Musk's mindset may not be that impossible things are easy. They are not. It is that impossible should sometimes be treated as a question, not a conclusion. And once you learn to ask better questions, you may discover that the limits you accepted were never as permanent as they seemed. Your impossible begins with the next question.